Hello, and welcome to the SBC Leaders Podcast. My name's Andrew McCarron, and I'm the Managing Director at SBC. With me today, I've got Sophie Wood. She's the Learning and Development Partner at Lottoland. Sophie, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Yeah, I'm working from home in Spain today, and the temperature's just picking up a little bit.
So, Sophie, you're Learning and Development Partner at Lottoland.
Yes.
I mean, that's a different role than you'd find in most companies. What does it entail on a day-to-day basis? Can you fill us in?
The role itself is quite broad. So, within my purview, I have responsibility, for example, for all learning development at Lottoland, with primary focus on management leadership training, and then personal growth training. I also have responsibility for all of our compliance training. So all of those mandatory courses that everyone loves. At the same time, I co-lead diversity and inclusion at Lottoland with Christina, who's is head of product for us. So and that is quite a big piece of work. I also look after wellbeing, mental health support at Lottoland. So I manage a resilience coach, currently called Nifa, and she supports our guys who are operational, who have those difficult contacts with customers. So from a safer gambling perspective, if somebody's showing kind of signs of kind of self-harm, or at the very worst case, kind of suicide ideation, then if our people have dealt with a difficult call like that, they need someone that they can talk to about that and debrief and kind of get rid of the kind of stress of that situation and have someone to talk it through with. So that's the primary focus of NIFA's role. And then I manage our operational training as well. So all the kind of new people coming into Lottoland, going through our customer service and operations team, they will be trained by one of my 3 trainers.
So you joined Lottoland in summer 2021, is that right? Is that a role created for you because I'm assuming that the whole pandemic situation brought staff resilience into a lot more focus, and Lottoland leadership recognised that and brought you in?
Yeah, it was very much an opportunity that was created for me. So I was working previously at Entain, and I just done a secondment for 12 months, their global inclusion manager, and really enjoyed doing that role. And I'd gone back, that was a maternity leave cover. And so at the end of that, I went back to my old learning development role, which was a bit disappointing for me, from a personal perspective, because you always want to keep moving forward, and felt like I was kind of returning to the role that I previously left. So that made me keen to seek out new opportunities. And I'd been speaking to Leah, kind of informally, who was just asking me and my other half, Danielle Wood, who also used to work at Entain, now working for Lottomart in the people team there. She was asking for advice and direction, and just asking general questions around diversity and inclusion. And we started conversing around that subject. And one conversation turned into 2, and 2 turned into 3, and then 3 turned into 4. And somewhere amongst that flow of conversations, one of them happened to be a kind of informal interview. And then Leah turned around and offered me the position to combine basically all of my previous experience. So, I'm quite an experienced learning development professional. As I say, passionate about diversity inclusion. Used to be a bit of an activist when I was back in the UK. And so from a working perspective, those are my 2 greatest passions.
So, Sophie, you come into a company like Lottoland, I mean, specifically on the diversity and inclusivity angle. How do you measure, your effectiveness there? How does the management and leadership side of things work out how effective you're being with what projects you're leading? And how do you know what to prioritize? Which areas need the most work quickest, and what can be put back as a bit more of a longer term project?
As soon as I joined, we sent out a kind of very lengthy and in-depth survey to everybody working at Lottoland, asking them what diversity inclusion meant to them, what kind of priorities they had around that area. We asked them to recount previous experiences, both in Lottoland and in previous companies, both positive and negative. And a few other questions aside. So we got lots of data from those surveys, and we then presented that data back to the company in a kind of company-wide town hall, where we addressed all the things that were working well and all the things from their perspective that were kind of not going so well. So it was our kind of list of things not going so well that kind of informed our priorities. The great thing about that survey, and we followed it up with listening groups as well to make sure we weren't making any assumptions. But the really pleasant thing for me was finding out how important people's nationality and culture is to them, and certainly with regards to them bringing their authentic selves into the workplace, and quite often not speaking English as a first language. And people throughout their industry experience had kind of not felt included because they didn't come from a kind of UK-centric, cultural background. We discovered that we've got 35 different nationalities working for us at Lottoland, which is a vast array. So we're kind of making nationality and cultural heritage a real kind of focal point of our D&I strategy this year. It's going to culminate in September. We're going to have what I'm calling a Festival of Nations, where we all get together and celebrate our kind of cultural identities. Everything from food, national dishes, to national heroes that have inspired us, to just telling stories about what it's like growing up in certain countries, just so that we can make those kind of connections with each other across the company, which sometimes you just don't get a chance to do when you're kind of working in high tempo, high pressure business areas. So to answer your question, we actually asked Lottoland what they thought about diversity inclusion, and we prioritised according to what people's perceived needs were. So one of the perceived needs was they recognised that we work really well in our teams at Lottoland, but they felt that we actually kind of work in silos quite a lot, and we failed to make those connections with the wider community. And I think Lottoland is a very young company, and I think when it started, it was small enough to people to naturally make those connections just by the sheer kind of volume of the workforce. But as the company's grown and is starting to expand into a bigger corporate entity, those connections are being lost along the way. So we're really going to try and break down those silos and those kind of interdepartmental barriers by, as I say, making connections with each other.
Okay, I mean, as I mentioned at the start of the interview, I guess it's a more unusual role for somebody to have within the industry, and I guess Lottoland is leading the way a little bit on that by bringing you in and having you lead on that aspect. But how do you think the rest of the industry is doing in regards to inclusion? Do you have much sort of dialogue with other companies in the space about those issues?
Some companies have really kind of like Lottoland, we've really got stuck in to do something really great for our people. I'm aware there's some great things happening in other companies, such as Kindred, such as GameSys. Some pretty good stuff going on at Entain. But I suppose, if I'm being honest, the way that I kind of keep in touch with the rest of the industry is actually through the All In Diversity project, which is our kind of industry-wide kind of organisation to represent all things around diversity and inclusion, and that's been a real godsend to the industry, I think. And that's kind of, I think I did the submission for Entain, I think for the benchmarking index, and when you saw the results of all the different companies, it was quite kind of small fry, if I can use that term. Whereas if I look at the most recent survey results that were published last year, you can actually see that activity in that space has really, really increased. Really increased. I'm really looking forward to getting the results of this year's index, because I think, like I say, some of those firms that I've mentioned, particularly kind of games as Kindred, I think William Hill are really up in their game around that area as well.
So obviously, you've got your development aspects of it, and to make Lottoland more attractive as an employer. Obviously, at the moment, recruitment is a big issue, not just in our industry, but across the globe. So if you can get potential employees to be cognizant of the inclusivity and particularly the development that you provide, I'm assuming that's a good thing.
I mean, I think people, if they haven't already kind of woken up to kind of having real values driven kind of expression of your culture, then people's hands will be forced in the years to come around that. I was having this conversation with our talent team just last week, and it's like when I was young and I was getting my first jobs in the marketplace, it's very much a case of you were kind of completely vetted by the company that you were trying to get a job working for. Whereas it seems that now it's more a case of applicants for roles are actually vetting the companies, rather than the other way around. So it seems to be a complete kind of switch of focus. And I think two major things are happening at the same time. So one, you've got a new generation of people coming into the workplace. So you kind of Generation Z or Z, depending on how you prefer to say that letter. They are very, very kind of values driven, if you're going to characterize that generation. So everything that we talk about with regards to corporate social responsibility, ESG, diversity, inclusion, all of those activities matter to that younger generation, and they will really kind of pick and choose who they apply to according to whether those companies meet their value set. It's generalizing terribly, but it's also younger generations have a more open mindset around things like diversity and inclusion as well, and are more accepting of people who are different to them, because they've grown up in the internet age. And whilst the internet has lots of negative things happening around the world with regards to the internet, the key kind of benefits, especially with regards to the social media element of the internet, is that it's giving communities a voice. And so people are kind of realizing that they're not alone on their journeys, that there are other people who have shared lived experiences. There are other people that have shared values. And so because the younger generations have grown up with that kind of exposure, then having people who look different, come from a different lived experience, doesn't hold any kind of fear, and there's less ignorance for people as well. So that's one factor. The other factor is obviously the lockdown, the series of lockdowns that happened due to COVID. And that just really forced people in general to reevaluate their lives, particularly their working lives and their working lives in relation to their home life as well. So all of a sudden, people suddenly realised how much money they spend on the commute, not just in monetary terms, but in time terms as well. And actually were forced into a situation where they felt those benefits on their home life, their family life. And that again has altered, people's expectations. So the pressure on companies is to meet those value sets and to offer that kind of flexibility of working if they're going to attract and retain the best talent, because it's very much a buyer's market when it comes to recruitment at the moment.
I mean, one of the things that happens in the UK at the moment is around the ethics of gambling. Yeah, and sometimes recruitment can hit a snag there when people are talking about the gambling industry as something that might not necessarily want to be involved with. I mean, is that something that you'll find that it is holding the industry back, the perception of it from an ethical perspective?
I think that does have an impact on people's decisions in terms of, do I want to work in an industry that could potentially harm people in society? And they are being fed a message, certainly by mainstream media, that that is kind of characteristic of all online gambling. So I think when you then kind of view the industry through that lens, kind of having an employer brand and value set that's kind of overtly looking after their staff, having a genuine commitment to protecting players who find themselves in the kind of problem gambling space, then the pressure's there for all of us within the industry to deliver on that front. And it's not about, you can't get away with being performative, which perhaps companies have done in the past. Throw a few kind of nice infographics and graphs out there. What people are interested in are stories at the end of the day. And if we want to give a good representation of ourselves to the wider community, to prospective candidates, and tackle the kind of narrative that's in the UK media, we need to be able to tell authentic, kind of good news stories of how we're actually making a real difference to, say, protecting people from a safe gambling perspective. So the pressure's on to really walk the walk.
Yeah, and then, like you say, bring a different perspective that you wouldn't normally get in business at the moment, but it can be so valuable.
Yeah. If you take alcohol, for example, that if somebody has an addiction to alcohol, it can be terribly damaging to them and people around them. And likewise, if people have an addiction to gambling, it can have similar effects. Yet you don't see a kind of mass media kind of coverage demonizing, the alcohol beverage industry in the same way that the gambling industry is copying for it at the moment. So there's a real lack of realistic perspective. And so we've got a real job to kind of change the balance of that narrative. If people realize, people who work in the gaming industry, some of the best people I've ever come across in my life, really generally good, good characters, who really want to kind of do well, succeed for themselves, for their families and their communities.
So, we were talking about the attractiveness of the gambling industry from an employee perspective. I mean, how did you join the gambling industry itself? How did you end up here?
my personal journey was quite bizarre. So I was working in the United Kingdom in the centre of the country, in the Midlands, for West Mercia Police, and I was training police officers and police staff in everything to do with the Police National Computer, which is the central repository for kind of criminal justice data. But all through this time, me and my other half had been kind of going on holiday to lovely locations, and we always invariably ended up popping around in the swimming pool going, how can we make this our life? How can we make this our life? And we could never unlock that key and find the answer to that question until we discovered the existence of Gibraltar. So we moved over here, and the first job that I got in Gibraltar was with Gala Bingo. So, and that was literally entry-level role. I had applied for more senior roles, I have to say, but at that time, having transferable skills wasn't widely recognised within the industry, to be fair. So I kind of went back to the front line, and I took customer service calls around everything to do with online bingo and actual real bingo being played in the bingo halls across the UK. So I always remember I was delivering a communications data course for detectives on a Friday afternoon. Then literally kind of flew over to Gibraltar that weekend, and the Monday after that course, I was learning how to play bingo.
It's kind of intense if you've not played it before, isn't it? Bingo, it can catch you out.
Yeah, it's really good, and so I got that kind of really good grounding. Not just on the bingo side of things, that led into kind of casino, led into sportsbook, kind of poker, all the main products, suddenly became part of my toolkit. And of course, as soon as that happened, it then kind of validates all your previous experience. So I was then able to apply for good jobs in learning development. I worked at 888 for 2 years as a fraud and risk analyst for them. So I've been able to bring all of my kind of great experience I got through working in UK policing to the benefit of, the customers of gambling companies who have a base in Gibraltar. So, and then, as I say, I've already mentioned, then one secondment opportunity to get involved in diversity inclusion again. And that led to me now working at Lottoland. So,
just one more thing before we go. We've been talking about different technologies and how they, impact how the industry is going to run. And there's a lot of talk about sort of the metaverse, and VR and that kind of things. But we tend to talk it from the consumer point of view. And I was wondering if you saw a way of sort of the metaverse technologies being used internally, maybe even by HR to speak to the employees.
I think there are definitely opportunities to be had, particularly actually more so from my areas, diversity, inclusion, learning development. So like the potential, for example, for people to kind of have learning experiences in the metaverse, which can actually kind of put them literally, in the place of somebody to experience what being discriminated is like, for example.
Yeah, suddenly roleplay doesn't feel so stupid if you're immersed in it.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think, areas such as learning development, kind of areas such as kind of onboarding into the organization as well, in terms of, perhaps being able to meet your virtual colleagues, before you actually kind of, start in the real world, then I think that's another really great area where people can make those connections with the people they're going to be working with before they start. Everything that's kind of, internet driven is I've had to make a journey to get there from my kind of default lived experience. Whereas people kind of born, late 90s and in the 2000s, they've never experienced life without the internet. So they haven't had to make that journey. They just think, oh, this is normal.
Yeah, well, I have the same conversation with my media team. When I went through my journalism degree, there was email, and that was about it, a very basic level of internet. So, yeah, I can feel that. It's amazing how quickly things can change, isn't it? But Sophie, thank you very much for your time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Hopefully, our listeners have too. Can't wait to catch up with you at our next SBC event. But up until then, this is Andrew McCarron for SBC Leaders.